the wall here. I think the talk had been real strong for the last week that the New York Giants wanted DeVonta Smith. And the Eagles were right on the other side of the Giants. And I think their feeling was, if we don't move right now, we're going to lose DeVonta Smith to the Giants. And then where are we? Because then Horn would be gone, and Surtain would be gone, and Waddle would be gone, and Smith would be gone. And this is what we talked about in the pregame, is the board was going to break right at that point where the Eagles were coming in at 12, and they couldn't afford to let that happen. And so you're right. It's a very unlikely dance partner for the Eagles to make a trade with the Cowboys and for the Cowboys to make the deal. But it's good value. I mean, the Eagles, all they give them is the 84th pick, a third-round pick to move up those couple spots that allow them to get DeVonta Smith and also keep him from going to the New York Giants, because I think that's where he was headed.
Now, the way the draft played out, and because Surtain was gone, who you think was on the top of Dallas's board, maybe it was Dallas who made the call, like, hey, do you still want to make the deal to move up to 10 to the Eagles? You think it might have played out that way?
Well, I think it put Dallas in a position where they were more likely to be willing to make a deal, because I really do think the Cowboys wanted Surtain.
Right.
They had been talking pretty openly about, look, they need to improve their defense. They really needed the other cornerback. I really think they had him circled. And when Denver came in and took him one spot ahead of the Cowboys, all of a sudden, something tells me that Jerry Jones and Howie Roseman were both reaching for the phone at almost exactly the same time, because it served each of their purposes.
Sure.
You know, the Cowboys were willing to trade out, get an extra pick. They had just lost the player that they really wanted, so they're looking to make a deal, and it allows the Eagles to jump up and get a player that they really needed and get him ahead of the New York Giants. So it's one of those very rare circumstances where the Eagles and the Cowboys each did each other a favor.
You think you'd never see it, but here we are today in the 2021 draft. And just to recap, the Eagles move up from 12 to 10 and give up the 12th pick and a third-round pick, the 84th pick, as Ray mentioned, and then they get the guy they want. Dallas moves back to 12, and the Eagles' next pick will be the 37th pick in the second round. But let's focus in on DeVonta Smith, Heisman Trophy winner. Comparisons to NFL players, who's a guy that fans can think of when they think of DeVonta Smith as far as an NFL player?
Well, among current players, you can think about Deshaun Jackson.
Okay.
In terms of being a small package, but with a lot of explosive ability. But I think the better comparison, the more apt comparison, is Marvin Harrison.
Okay.
And, you know, I even hesitate to go there because you're talking about a Hall of Fame player.
Tremendous pressure.
And a Philadelphian,
sure,
besides. But in terms of body type, the way he runs routes, the way everybody always thought that Marvin Harrison will never make through a season, but the fact of the matter is he never missed a game. He's able to protect himself, and he's able to play the sidelines, doesn't take a whole lot of big hits, and always was able to get that separation. Always was able to beat the double coverage. He always had that extra gear that he was always able to pull away from that press coverage and get open. Same kind of skill set that DeVonta Smith has. And when you think about what he did this year in Alabama, you know, Waddle gets hurt early, and now the whole offense really kind of falls on him. And every game that they played in that tough SEC, every team was
top of the scouting
Every
report,
team was gearing to stop DeVonta Smith, and none of them could. I mean, 117 catches, 1,800 yards, 23 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns in the first half of the national championship game. One of the things I really like when I'm evaluating players, Dan, is how well do they play in big games? How well do they play in the big spot against the best opponents? And with DeVonta Smith throughout his entire career, it was true that in the biggest games was when he played his best. So I know he's small. People think that 166 pounds is small, and it is by NFL standards, but he never played small. And as you saw in some of the film clips we showed in the pre-show, he has no problem going across the middle. Sure. He has no problem catching the ball in traffic, and he's very effective in the red zone. He's very effective from the 20 on in, which a lot of smaller receivers are not. So I think, size aside, and I'm not thinking it's that big a deal, he's really the complete package here. And for an Eagles team that last year ranked 31st in yards per pass play, near the very bottom of the league, they desperately needed playmakers. They needed more weapons for Jalen Hurts. And here you reunite him with a guy that he actually played college football with.
Great segue to my next question, because suddenly Smith and Hurts have instant rapport from their time in college. You said that Smith was the guy at the top of your board in particular, but Waddle went before him.
Yeah.
Did that surprise you, or do you think that Smith was the best pick for the Eagles at 12? Now turned out to be 10.
It didn't surprise me because Waddle is, in his own right, he's a very dynamic player. Sure. If this had been reversed and Smith had gone and the Eagles had, I would have said trade for Waddle, because I think what they really needed was that kind of dynamic playmaker. But as the two of them, a lot of teams, two factors. Waddle is also a really good special teams player. I mean, he was a major punt return threat in college, and I'm sure he'll return punts in the NFL. So that, a lot of teams like that dual ability. And the other part was, I think some teams were scared off when they weighed DeVonta Smith in and found out that he was 165 pounds. That scared some people off. So Waddle's stock kind of rose in the last couple of weeks because people really began to like that punt return ability, and some people became a little more concerned about Smith and his size. So this kind of left the door open, but he would not have fallen much further, because I really do believe that the Giants were going to take him at 11.
All right, Dallas Cowboys are on the clock right now with the 12th pick that the Eagles would have had, so interesting to see how that plays out. There was a great cutaway after the pick was announced of the Eagles' war room and Nick Sirianni and Howie Roseman slapping 5 and giving big hugs, and Jeffrey Lurie and Nick Sirianni as well. Are they making the right moves to set Sirianni up to hit the ground running with this new position that he has as the head coach, considering all the boxes they needed to check? You feel like this is the big splash they needed?
Oh, I think it's a real plus. You know, you got Nick Sirianni is a guy who was a wide receiver. He's coached wide receivers, and now you've given him the best wide receiver in this whole college class. You're giving him a Heisman Trophy winner to work with, and you're bringing. And I know some people say, look, the Eagles have 1 million receivers right now, and you're adding another young wide receiver to a bunch of other young wide receivers. I get that. But none of them have the pedigree of this guy, and to me, none of them have the ability of this guy. So, you know, I don't think there's going to be much of a transition for him coming from college football to the NFL, because the SEC is as good as it gets in college football. And he's been coached again by Nick Saban, who's a great coach, and playing in big games throughout his career. So the idea of stepping onto the big stage, he's been playing on the big stage for a while, and it hasn't bothered him. So I think there's not going to be a long period of adjustment for this guy coming to the NFL. All the reports on him is he's got tremendous character, great work ethic, tremendous football IQ, and tough as nails. Saban's not an easy guy to play for, but Saban loved this guy. In fact, he said that he's my favorite player that I've ever coached. So when Nick Saban says that about you, that's pretty high praise.
All right, the selection is in for the Dallas Cowboys. Still waiting to see what they do, but I'll just transition to this next question is, Ray, when you look at what's happened so far with the Eagles and what they've done in the offseason getting to this point, are you surprised? What's your emotion level when you look at the fact that they didn't screw this up? This wasn't Danny Watkins or Marcus Smith. They actually got it right with an impact player.
I'm pleased that they did what they did.
Right.
I mean, it was really on the razor's edge here. If they hadn't made this trade, and if the Cowboys had not agreed to make this trade, they would have been in a really bad spot.
Right.
Because I really do think Smith was going to go next to the Giants. And then if you're the Eagles, now you're sitting at 12, and all the guys you really wanted are gone. And now where do you go?
Right.
Are you going to beat another trade down? You think the fans in the city, how would they have felt about that? Not too good. So the Eagles kind of dodged a bullet here, but I give them credit. I think they salvaged the situation. And for the value that for a third-round pick to be able to make that move and get a player of this caliber, I think they did well. You know, the roster is not particularly good. They have to start, they don't like to say they're rebuilding, but in fact they are rebuilding. But you need good players and you need good people to rebuild around.
Right.
And with DeVonta Smith, they have a guy that has high character, tremendous ability, has proven he can play against really tough competition, and a guy that, again, I think is going to come in and not have a really tough transition into the NFL. I think it's going to be seamless.
Roger Goodell walking to the podium with the Cowboys pick, but you mentioned the seamless transition for DeVonta Smith. So that, to me, means that he's going to be a starter on this team. Is that how you see him stepping in?
I would think so.
Right.
Yeah, I would certainly. I'd be shocked if it were otherwise.
Right.
I mean, who's going to beat him out on this team?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
right.
I mean, based on what you saw, I mean, you desperately needed playmakers. And he can play pretty much anywhere. I mean, they'll play him in the slot some. They can play him at X. They can play him at Z.
Yeah.
I mean, they can play him all over the place. And he's a guy that can run every route, and he's got uncommon acceleration. I mean, his ability to get from 0 to 60 is unlike other players. He probably, on terms of the stopwatch, he probably isn't as stopwatch fast as Waddle is. You know, Waddle might be the fastest receiver in the whole
draft,
group.
yeah.
But in terms of how fast they play, getting in and out of breaks, that kind of thing, Smith is right there. And you look at his yards per catch average throughout his career. I mean, he caught 117 balls this year, but none of them were like little underneath type stuff. I mean, he had 117 catches and averaged about 18 yards a catch. So that's major production against major competition.
Yeah, it's easy to see why the Eagles fell in love with this guy, particularly the way the draft played out, because you see a guy like J.C. Horn go ahead of Patrick Surtain the second, and it kind of gives you a little bit of pause, but the way it played out kind of played into the Eagles' favor because that made Dallas willing to move their pick. So Micah Parsons going to the Dallas Cowboys, woo, that is going to be something the Eagles will have to deal with for years to come. Particularly pairing him with the pairings they have at linebacker right now with the Dallas Cowboys, the kid out of Notre Dame, DeVonta Smith, and what they have there.
Van Der Esch.
Yeah, what do you make of the Dallas' selection here, putting Parsons in with that group?
I thought this was a possibility. They just lost Sean Lee. Sean Lee retired.
Right.
And their defense last year was not very good. I mean, they thought it was going to be better. They need a real playmaker kind of guy in that defense. Smith has been, from what they expected him to be, probably a little bit of a disappointment. And they need a guy who can be a catalyst kind of player in that defense. And one thing about Parsons has real versatility. He can play, I mean, and he said it in the interview beforehand, I mean, he can play inside, and he has played inside effectively. But he can also get out on the edge and rush the quarterback. I mean, you can play him just about any which way you can play him, and he's effective. So for a Cowboys team that really needs to rebuild their defense, look, they have a ton of offensive weapons. They really didn't need more weapons on offense. What they really need are guys who can make a difference on defense. And, you know, Parsons, there's no question about his ability. The only questions are off the field. And the Cowboys have no problem taking chances with guys that have problems off the field. Sometimes it works out for them, sometimes it comes back to bite them. But he's the kind of guy that Jerry Jones has taken chances on before, and he's the kind of player they needed. If he can come in here and if he's matured, if he's kind of grown up and he's ready to harness his ability and go out and concentrate on playing football, he's a difference-making player.
Well, it's funny as he gives a big bear hug to Roger Goodell as he's selected with the 12th overall pick. What's interesting, Ray, is we have a bit of a dichotomy between players like Parsons, who didn't play in 2020, and then guys like DeVonta Smith, who won the Heisman Trophy, who were all getting drafted interchangeably next to each other, being swapped for picks for each other. How much do you think that played into what the Eagles decided to do, or Dallas, or vice versa?
Well, I think that this year it was a very challenging year for NFL personnel directors because you had so many players that opted out for this season for very valid reasons. They just chose not to play. Some whole conferences didn't play. A lot of teams didn't play, or they played an abbreviated schedule. So as a result, there was just a lot less tape out there to look at these guys, to do your evaluation. You didn't have the combine workouts that you had in the past. So you went into this draft, I think most teams went into this draft feeling like they didn't have as much information as they've had in the past. And is it going to lead to more mistakes? And probably there will. I mean, unavoidably, if you have less empirical evidence in front of you, the chances of making a mistake are that much greater. But I think the Eagles felt very comfortable with DeVonta Smith. I mean, they were looking at the Alabama players, the three Alabama players. I called them the Tuscaloosa Triangle,
right.
And they played a full schedule. I mean, so there wasn't any issue there. Okay, you didn't have them at the combine, but after all the games you saw them play against really good competition, national championship, you had seen enough at that point. Just watching them run a 40-yard dash in a pair of shorts wasn't going to change your opinion of them.
Right.
So that was an advantage the Eagles had. Cowboys are taking a little bit of a flyer now on a player that sat out this year, but they feel his athletic ability and his football ability, which he certainly demonstrated before that made him worth the risk.
He is the author of the Eagles Encyclopedia. Make sure you go pick that up. For Ray Didinger, I'm Danny Pommells. This has been On the Clock, live reaction brought to you by PJ Wheelahan.